For those of you who are regulars to the Eye for Pharma webinars, you'll know that Paul Sims is normally at the helm, but today it's me. For those of you who don't know me, I am the former head of global patient advocacy at Teva, and have recently established a new NGO called Person Before Patient and running my own business called the Wilson Lab. I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, which is called The Future of Patient Services, a topic which is extraordinarily close to my heart. Now, I understand that there is an audience of over 1,100 people on today, and we're delighted to welcome you all. This webinar is proving incredibly popular, and we think that is because it's a topic of close interest to all of us about how pharma can actually harness technology and innovation to support patients. Myself, I believe that this is an intersection that will define us as an industry going forward. Greater adoption of healthcare technology will soon start to turn the tables. We are moving away from an era where experts, such as doctors, were the only resource for patients. And suddenly we are in a world where the patient is not only armed with visibility and understanding of their own data, but also have better access to tools. And they are informed and they are led by technology. So in this world, what does pharma patient solutions actually look like? This free webinar is going to be giving you an awareness of the emerging technology that will have the greatest impact on patients' lives, not only enabling true personalisation and giving you a sense of where pharma executives can invest more for the greater impact. Now, I'm not doing this on my own. I am joined by an amazing panelist, and you should be able to see their smiling faces on the screen now. I'd like to introduce Megan. Megan is currently the Director of Patient Services at Ipsen Biopharmaceuticals, and she joins us from New Jersey. Now, I will tell you that this is a geographically diverse panelist today. So Megan is joining us from New Jersey. In her current role at Ipsen, where she has been for the last 5 years, she has led the strategy and operations of the patient support program for all of the Ipsen US products. We are also joined by Nagore, who is responsible for building and executing the strategy of the Patient Solutions Division in Ashfield for Europe and Canada. And that work involves the design and execution of innovative patient support programs. And to add to the geographical diversity, she speaks Spanish, English, Italian, and French. We also have joining us from Ashfield is Neil. Neil has been with the business for 9 years, and actually, interestingly, his career started as a summer internship while studying economics at the University of Southampton, and that continuation of studies is happening as he prepares for his MBA at Henley Business School. Now, moving slightly geographically afield, we have Dr. Fombu Emmanuel, who is joining us from Peru today. He is a recognized authority on the convergence of digital technologies in healthcare, an award-winning author, physician, and medical futurist with over 10 years of combined experience in clinical medicine, drug development, medical affairs, research, pragmatic trials, and product lifecycle management. And he is currently working with Novartis and Johnson & Johnson. We are also joined by our secret guest of today, Lode, who is the Chief Patient Officer at Servier, a career that started when he studied and practiced medicine in Belgium and South Africa, and very quickly realizing that good education about health and disease was at least as important as good medicines to help patients achieve the best outcomes. So as I think you'll agree, we have a phenomenal panelist today, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have. But first off, we are going to have an introductory presentation from the Ashfield team. So I would like to hand over to Nagore and Neil for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you can all see the presentation on the screen. If nobody says the opposite, I would start. So first of all, for those of you who may not know who Ashfield is, Ashfield Healthcare, well, we provide services for the pharmaceutical industry, and specifically in my division, Patient Solutions, we focus on the design and execution of patient support programs. So patient education and training, and also HCP education and training. So we have 17 years experience at global level, and we have served more than 30 therapeutic areas in the space of orphan, oncology, specialty, and chronic disease. So today, in this webinar, as Ruth was saying, we're going to explore and discover amongst us the technologies that will have the greatest impact on patients' lives. And actually, we want to focus on customer experience. And of course, that means we need to look at those that enable true personalization and those that will disrupt that patient experience. So we would all agree that whatever the technology is that we implement, it should make our life simpler. It should simplify our day-to-day and take the pain of those things that take the most of our time. I guess you would all agree with me that this should also apply to the technology used in healthcare, right? And I think that other industries have incorporated technology more effectively than the healthcare sector. Think about Amazon. Well, they've leveraged technology to browse in millions of shops from your fingertip, shop, and even have it delivered to wherever you want on the same day. However, if you're thinking about how we still receive healthcare, how we book appointments, how we access our records, how we visit the doctor, I do think there is huge unexplored potential in the healthcare industry. So today, we're going to explore how the greater adoption of healthcare technology will soon turn those tables and improve that patient experience. So how will patient care be shaped by technology? Let's first reflect on what is the current situation for many patients today. As I mentioned earlier, Ashfield, we provide patient support programs, so I'm going to use this as an example. Until very recently, patients may have been surrounded by multiple channels when it comes to the way they receive care in a patient support program. They may have received, or they may receive information by different digital channels, such as apps, websites, or even by mail or post still, and through face-to-face interactions with nurses, perhaps, clinical educators, even pharmacists in some programs. There are loads of channels that we have been using in patient services, both traditional channels and certainly newer channels. However, these may still be disconnected in some cases and for certain programs. So from a patient point of view, there may be a lot of information coming through different channels, which is not always connected or integrated. Patient experience is not seamless, it feels disjointed, and for us, providers of such services, the efforts seem disparate and are not efficient in the way we would like them to be. So other industries, and I mentioned Amazon, are showing that they can integrate seamlessly. They can adopt new technological trends very easily. So what do we need to do in the healthcare provider industry and in the healthcare industry in general, pharma industry, in order to be prepared? So let's see first where the healthcare industry is heading. In this slide, we can see what experts such as Gartner think about what the future will bring. So I just want to set the scene with some statistics, I guess. So by 2022, 20% of the population with chronic conditions will rely on virtual health assistants. By 2025, we will be seeing a third of all care encounters using virtual care technologies such as virtual health assistant, remote patient monitoring, video consultation. Neil will talk about those later on. And also, Gartner's prediction is that by 2027, we will probably see the majority of encounters taking place virtually, and the majority of those involving AI-based technologies. So, now to make it a little bit more complex, this diagram shows some of the emerging technologies that will surround the patient care from now on into the future. We are seeing these types of technologies published in recent articles. We are hearing them from the thought leaders in the healthcare industry, in the technology industry. And we can see three very distinctive areas. Diagnosis, all of those technologies that will help physicians diagnose faster and more accurately, such as AI imaging or predictive analytics. Treatment, and all of those technologies that will enable better treatment options, such as 3D printing, we're hearing a lot of that, or precision medicine. And finally, one that I'm most interested on, care management and prevention. So, which involves all those technologies that aim to make prevention or care easier. So remote health, telehealth, wearables, and again, Neil will discuss some of those later. So I presume that most of you would have heard or read about all, or at least some of these technologies and how they are applied. But out of all of these technologies that you've just seen in the previous slide, or enablers that we could envisage in an ideal patient care platform and world, we have highlighted some of those that we think will have a greater impact for patients and patient experience in the arena of patient support from a provider point of view. And in fact, as we want to be a player in the future of healthcare, we in Nashville have already started to incorporate some of these technologies in our IT roadmap. I'm going to hand over to Neil to explore the trajectory of these technologies we've chosen. So Neil, off to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Ngore. I guess the first thing I wanted to say is just that it's really difficult to make predictions about the future, but we're going to give it a good go anyway. And so I think what we've focused on, we've focused on three technologies, but we've also looked at, what is the immediate future of these technologies in the next 10 years, and how do they become more accessible to pharmaceutical companies and bring a lot of value to patients. And so the first technology that we've looked at is wearable devices, leveraging Internet of Things. We'll also look at telemedicine and artificial intelligence, but wearable devices is where we're going to start. And the first thing I'll just mention is that we designed the slides in a way to try and denote that the blue boxes really determine specific breakthroughs or improvements in this area, whereas the grey boxes highlight actually supporting technologies that will actually improve the value of this to a patient. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight, is that often it's the whole network effect of technology improving that brings a lot more value. And so, my view of the current state and when we research of wearable devices is that it's really split between down the middle. You've got your mass market wearables, which we're all familiar with, Fitbit, Samsung Smart Gear, those kind of devices, capturing a lot of lifestyle data, a lot of fitness data. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got very specialized medical devices designed to do a specific thing or capture specific health data. For example, blood glucose monitoring system. And I think if we look at the short to medium term shift, it's actually arguably one of the big changes, and one of the things that's having a massive impact is a change in the FDA approval process for digital medical devices, and the streamlining of that process. And that's really encouraging your major players within this area, your Apples, your Samsungs, to start really investing, because it's significantly easier to get items to market. Outside of those mass market wearables, we're also seeing specific innovations in certain areas. So a prime example would be wearable blood pressure monitors. Previously that would be a blood pressure cuff that was done by a doctor. Omron, I think, to name one example, have just brought out a smartwatch which has a cuff that does this remotely, which is a really exciting innovation. So they're starting to join the market, the mass market. We're also, the big area that there's been a lot of research into, and it is believed by research companies like Gartner that this will be cracked in the next 10 years, is non-invasive glucose monitoring. The idea that you won't need to do the skin prick test going forward, and that will be a massive improvement in what is obviously a large therapy area. But the complementary factors are equally important, and we'll talk about open API development briefly in the next slide, but also the idea of electronic health records being, or health records being digitalized around the world, is bringing a lot more data to patient support providers to then apply against wearable health data, and that really helps with designing care plans. And what does the end state look like for wearables? Well, arguably, wearable devices will just become part of everyday life commodities. Wearable smart clothing is already being looked at. There is prototypes around wearable contact lenses, and so it will really just become part of everyday life, and that will bring a lot of environmental and life and health lifestyle data into a patient support program. I didn't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Nagore?
Well, actually, in actual fact, in Ashfield, I wanted to mention we are already integrating a range of data sets driven from wearables to enable us to create what we call dynamic care plans for patients in our patient support programs. This means we utilize the data gathered in order to personalize patient support more appropriately and in real time, which is great.
Perfect. So if we look then next at telehealth or telemedicine, I knew I was going to do that. And what I mean by telemedicine is the remote delivery of healthcare services. So these are your health assessments, your consultations over some kind of telecommunications infrastructure. What does this look like at the moment? Really, the current state for a lot of patient support providers is defined by video conferencing or something similar, a very standalone system, or a call center potentially. And some of the major challenges associated with effective telehealth when it is that kind of approach, really obviously the physical challenges that come with trying to do a consultation to a patient that's not physically in front of you. Also the concerns patients have around security and how to access this service easily. But also, and this is an interesting point, is that these tend to be standalone systems, not often fully integrated with the whole patient platform. And so it can be really seen, the result of that can often be seen that it's a bit of an optional extra to a patient rather than maybe their main preferred channel, which, as the data that Nagore presented earlier, that seems to be the trend that will become the norm. Short to medium term shifts here. Open API development. What I mean by that is this new approach to building systems and designing systems together. It's a movement into system design where previously applications and systems had little or no integration or interoperability between each other. So a prime example would be your old Apple devices. You buy Apple and it would only ever work with Apple. That's significantly changed. And what that helps us to provide is integrate best practice systems into an ecosystem to make it a better patient experience. The addition of wearable smart diagnostic devices, that gives more context to the caregiver. So you've got more information to talk to a patient about over those telemedicine calls. But also it almost is the uninteresting element of telemedicine, but so important from a patient experience perspective is this idea of orchestration. So it's not just about having a WebEx with a patient. It's actually how do they wait for that to happen? How easy is it to get in front of someone? So that's all your scheduling, your virtual waiting room software. And so all of the above will mean that, the idea of telemedicine will significantly improve from a patient perspective. It will be easier to access, more secure, and become really fully integrated with patient support programs. The elephant in the room, however, is that the adoption of virtual healthcare assistants will arguably change this. At the moment, we're just talking about an interaction with a person. We're already seeing the trials of this kind of technology, but this we'll talk about in the next slide. Nagore, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yes, just as a summary, the key aspect for me as a provider of patient support services is I guess, to build those foundation platforms in order to sustain the development and growth of these technologies that you're mentioning. So connectivity, integration of data, and the power to analyze such data, for me, it's in real time. I think it's key. And I guess, at least us with Health Cloud, we have the foundation to be able to leverage AI and to connect with the system partners. And this makes it, I guess, all this line that you are showing a reality.
Precisely. And so finally, one of the big, obviously artificial intelligence is a major technology that's discussed regularly. And there's a lot of hype around AI. What is it? How can it be applied? How can it be managed? What are the different types? Now, really, we're simplifying it here, but I think it's important to kind of look at where will be the applications in the next 10 years. And so if we look at the current state, I feel you can define it. Maybe it's slightly oversimplified, but I think you can define it in two main areas. One is operational efficiency. So, using AI to support administration of the delivery of a patient care program, more specifically things like demand forecasting, supply chain logistics, staff scheduling, and things like Salesforce Health Cloud can do these kind of orchestration activities. And then there's the other element, which is around diagnosis applications. So we see this with things, the adoption of the ADA and Babylon systems. These are the applications that allow a patient or a potential patient to interact and provide feedback to questions and allow the system then to learn and analyze and ultimately provide a recommendation. And I think that's really interesting. But I think what's interesting is how is society accepting that? And it's actually becoming very much more easier for us to have that kind of almost conversation with technology, which really was driven mostly around surveys and things like that previously. And if you take AI in the home with things like Alexa and Apple Home, you know, we're seeing that as well, is that people are more willing to interact with technology through voice. And so, you know, the major short to medium shift, apart from all of the improvements in AI, is this availability of more data. You know, if AI is an engine room, then the amount of data being put in, health data, is really going to fuel the ability to use AI in different ways. So that's going to really improve the way that AI will be leveraged. And so the end state is all sorts of different applications, but I think I'll probably concentrate lastly on this idea of virtual healthcare assistants. So, you know, it's the idea that really, and this is being designed, there are lots of different types of virtual healthcare assistants, and Molly is a good example of this that's been trialed. But it's the idea that you can have an interaction with a virtual device in your home over a conversation, and that really is the front end to a patient support program with all the orchestration going on in the background. And so AI runs through all aspects of patient care and will significantly improve not only operational efficiency, but patient adherence and engagement.
Yes, and actually for me, Neil, as a patient support provider, I guess virtual assistants, we can enrich the patient experience. I mean, this doesn't mean that other real or face-to-face channels won't be available, but it just enriches the choice for patients and caters, I guess, for different needs.
Completely agree.
So there's a lot of tech out there, and we've spoken about a few of them, 3 that we chose. But the objective is, I guess, to invest in the tech that brings the most value into the service that we deliver. So we need to bear in mind that we need an integrating engine as the foundation in which to build this technology. So what are the building blocks of patient support or patient care delivery or patient delivery? So we cannot think about technologies in an isolated way, and that's the key thing, and this is probably what we've done wrong in years. So this image shows the ideal design of an integrated care platform where, you know, IT systems are the engine that will run in the background. Things are the devices or systems that will assist the patient and collect or capture information. And ecosystems will allow integrations of different systems in order to for data or information to flow. So if I could just choose one takeaway for the audience, what I would like to highlight is that only with a good patient care or patient engagement or, you know, patient health platform foundation, we will be ready to adopt what is yet to come in the future in regards to technology. So my question to ignite the thinking is, have you thought of those building blocks from a great that form a great patient care platform? Are you partnering with the right providers or building to support your future patient care technological success? So I'm handing over to Ruth, just with a reminder to say, look, we need to think about the customer experience first and then work back towards the technology, not the other way around. And thank you very much for listening to both of us, and let's start the conversation.
Thank you so much, Nagore, and also to Neil. I certainly found that food for thought. And just sort of building upon the question you have left for us, let's go to a poll. Now, everyone on the line, the audience, please feel free to say hello. There is a section where you can ask questions and you can participate. And we're going to just make sure you're all awake and listening with our first poll, which is building upon this point. What is driving pharma's technology adoption in patient services today? You have 4 to choose from: differentiating your brand in a competitive environment, the expectation of patients who demand this technology, expectation of customers who are demanding this technology, or the potential of technology, pharma's internal drive to achieve more? Now, I'm going to give you maybe 30 seconds to make a decision. Hopefully you can just suggest one, and we'll close the poll in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If we close the poll, we should see the perspectives of the audience. Now, I'm going to, oh, this is interesting. It's sort of very closely differentiating your brand in a competitive environment and the potential of technology. This is a very interesting combination. Now, thank you ever so much, Nagore and Neil, for your presentation. I have a question for our panelists. I'm going to ask Emmanuel first, then Megan, and then Lode. I want to ask, if the virtual interactions are going to become more commonplace than traditional consultations as outlined in the presentation, how do you believe that companies will adapt to this commercial model which actually benefits from this shift? Emmanuel, can I start with you? Emmanuel, are you there? If you're on mute, not to worry. Megan, can I ask you that question, and we'll wait for Emmanuel to come back to us.
The panelists may be mute.
Yes, if the panelists are on mute, can you come off mute? Lode, are you there?
I'm here.
Lode, let's go to you first. Always good in a technology conversation when things work. Lode, we'll go backwards. Let me ask you the question. You heard me ask about virtual interactions to become more commonplace. What do you believe are the drivers for companies to achieve this commercial model?
Well, looking at the vote, I am not surprised that we are at the one side looking to what we have, which is the differentiation of our brand, and at the same time going for a promise, which is, oh God, this will change everything. And it really tells me, this vote, that we really don't know yet. So the way I would answer your question is that I think we will not just shift. I think we will have pilots, because even with your beautiful curve of how many percentage people adopted, in 10 years, 15 years, still a third of people, elderly people, as in the survey, will not use this technology. So from a business perspective, you want to be moving as fast as your market, but never faster. So if we would all go virtual, we would lose incredible business. So what I think is that we will have a gradual shift, which is good, because that allows us to learn by doing. And that's necessary, because we are still all feeling our way into this. The one thing that I think we have to learn by doing that is that we've always worked for very simple systems. We have one commercial model, and this is what it is, and now we shift to the next one. The truth is that we are in a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's unpredictable, blah, blah, blah. But it's also that not a single business model will work anymore. In the same way as a single drug doesn't work for all patients, and a single detail aid doesn't work for all prescribers, there will not be a single digital system that works for all patients. And we see, one of the shifts we see, for example, is the bring your own device, which is directly related to Neil said about API open source, because it allows that interoperability. It is, everybody of us probably, or 80% has an iPhone, but if you open that iPhone, it looks entirely different. So I think, and in the same, that's the first one. The second thing we'll have to let go is the idea that as a single player we can solve this, because the last slide with the different aspects with artificial intelligence in the middle basically tells us that none of us on the phone, whether you're academia, hospital, provider, or industry, can actually own and control this ecosystem. We will have to find a way to work with other stakeholders So that is the two things that I see. And again, as Neil said, it's very hard to make statements, predictions, especially about the future. I think we'll have to let go of the idea that there's a single solution, a single player, and a single model. That would be my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. And Megan, the same question to you.
Sure. So the first thing that I always am very careful of is patient privacy and making sure that we are protecting the patient information that they've kindly enough shared with us so that we can help them with the products that they're on. So if we were going to move forward with any additional technology outside of what we would do, the first step that I would take would be evaluating with our legal and compliance teams, how do we move it into practice? And then are we compliant? And are we keeping patient privacy at the forefront and really thinking about them? So I would start the conversation of what is our goal? Why do we think this is important? And then how do we get there and figure out which technology is the right fit and have the justification behind it.
Thank you. And Emmanuel, if you can hear me now, I'm fascinated by the part of your role which is about medical futurism, and this point that Neil made, which and Lode picked up on. It is very difficult to predict the future. What are your perspectives about the shift from virtual interactions becoming more commonplace versus the traditional consultation?
Correct. I hope you can hear me this time around.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I agree. Fantastic. So I think the key question is why virtual, right? I actually designed a clinical study recently where we actually took that study to our leadership group. They pushed back on that study, and the reason was we had too many patient visits during the study. And the idea was, how do we make things easier for the patient and make the patient the center of what we do? And so the idea of virtual is, why burden the patient to come into the doctor's office if it's unnecessary, right? And so if you look at the future of healthcare, where things are going, is that idea of healthcare taking place at your home in real world settings where you are. You don't have to show up in the hospital or doctor's office just to get blood done or just to get blood pressure checked, right? We have devices that can monitor blood pressure and heart rate remotely. So why have you come into a physical wall where you have to travel a couple of hours away to get to a particular site? So I think the drive to virtual is a drive to convenience, and it's something that patients will embrace. And it's the same common thing now with virtual calls, right? This webinar, we could have this by traveling to a location in London or New York and sit in the room and speak to each other, or we could leverage technology like this and have these great discussions with like-minded folks like ourselves. So it's the convenience of it, and that's what would drive it. So I think the future is not this particular question. I don't think it's something that is 10 years ahead of us or 2 years ahead. I think it's here today.
Thank you. And Emmanuel, just to build upon that, what do you think are the technologies and innovations that will make the biggest difference to patients?
Correct. I think wearables have a major role to play. I think if you look at by companies like Fitbit, right, Apple, they are collecting tons of data. They have communities that engage patients, engaging consumers, right, and changing health behaviors. So I think that is the beginning of what is about to happen, where we are focused more on this disease prevention kind of model, right, and this increase in wellness, and making the consumer more aware of their health. So I think the data generated from all these wearable technologies and connected devices that are around us, even our phones track our activities and sleep patterns. I think the amount of data that is going to be generated from this will enable a lot of data scientists to build incredible algorithms that could help us prevent adverse events in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. And Lode and Megan, I have a question for you. I will read it out. It's coming from the audience. There's a question about what level of education do you think we should be providing patients? I myself sometimes feel quite overwhelmed with some of the terms and the acronyms that are used when we're discussing technology. But the question is, who do you think should be providing this technology education to patients? Lode, can we have your perspectives first and then Megan?
Happy to, but I'm not entirely sure that I understand. Who should provide the education or the technology, or the education about the technology?
The education about the technology. Apologies for if I was less than clear in my reading of the question.
Yeah, but I think it's a very good question, because there's the technology of education. And I truly believe that technology will change education in the same way like we have half of the planet, which is now engaging in those so-called MOOCs, that are the mass open online courses that allow them to learn. And so I think that there's the technology of education which will dramatically improve outcomes for patients, because the single most predictive factor for the health of a population of a country is still the education of its citizens, and most particularly of the mothers, of the women. So this is the technology of education. I think we still have a lot of work to do there, also in pharma, because we talk a lot about multi-channel, but I'm not so sure that we see the fact that we talk about multi-channel is that we look at the channels only at getting the same information to the same person, which brings us to the education, to the point that everybody will need different education, like you said. And so I think technology, including with AI, could be able to adapt a certain educational content to your own reading level, because the AI is watching what you're posting, the stuff you're reading, the style that you digest. And so it can actually adapt content to what works best for you, right? If you, like my kids, only visual and look at YouTube, whereas my generation will look at Wikipedia and we're still in the reading, the artificial intelligence will deliver it to you the way that it works best for you. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is it will actually be able to measure the impact of the education. I think that's very important. We have with all of the best intentions, and I've worked in medical affairs for a few decades, we have invested a lot as pharmaceutical industry in so-called education of physicians. But it was all uploading. We have been very unsuccessful actually measuring the impact of that, measured as in true behavior change and true different care for patients. So, and you can apply those to the other side of the question, is who should educate the people about technology? The good news is that the younger people seem to get this as part of their bread and butter. But the truth is, the ones I'm worried about is the middle, slightly older generation, which is my group, because we'll be those very elderly people that the statistic was about. And I'm already struggling, frankly, personally, with Instagram. So and people don't sit down and tell you how to go. So I don't know who's going to do it. Is it the one who sells me the machine? Is it the one who provides me the content? I'm not very clear, but I do think that pharma again has a role to play, because there's nothing worse than delivering technology that is not used simply because people don't know how to use it.
Thank you, Lode.
Just a few
Megan, that's great. Megan, can I bring you into this conversation as well, please?
Sure. So I have kind of two answers, and Lode kind of hit on them both ways. I think it depends what you're looking for. So if you're just talking about technology in general, then I'm not sure that it necessarily falls on the manufacturer, on the drug maker. But I do think it's important, if you're creating some sort of technology that's specific around your product or something that you're working to help that patient on a disease state, that if you create an app or you create a wearable device or anything, you have the right support. And that probably would fall within a patient services shop in conjunction with the marketing team. And there are a couple of things that I just quickly came to mind with. The first one would be exactly as Lode mentioned, like a YouTube video. That's probably one of the cheapest, easiest ways to train somebody. If they need help, they can go to it, they can watch it, they can see every button you click and explanation of what it does. It could be a video on a product website. So there are video opportunities in various forms. The other option would be more of a one-on-one overview, where maybe they call into your patient support hub and there's somebody that's there to specifically help with technology around that particular app or whatever it is for that product. And they can walk that patient stroke by stroke. Here's the button you push. This is what it does. This is what it means. Here's how you set alerts. Whatever those steps are, somebody should be able to handhold. And it could be either on phone or even like a chat box.
Very interesting. Thank you. I'm going to bring the audience into the conversation now, and we're going to ask another poll question, because your two answers generated a thought in my mind about companies' general attitude towards technology adoption. So we're going to ask the audience to describe their company's general attitude to technology adoption. Now, we've provided 4 options again for you. The first one is try, see what works, learn, get stuck in. Secondly, observe, wait, enter later with a reduced risk when when others are committed. Third, being hire experts, focus most resources into a single flagship project. And then the fourth is ignore, optimize for today's environment, and rely on the existing capabilities. Now, I'm going to open, while we give some time for the audience to reflect on their companies, and this is anonymous, so nobody will know what this is. I'm going to invite all of the panelists to make some comments and offer some thoughts on the answers. So I think that's given it about 30 seconds. If we can close the poll and see what the results are. So we can all see the results here. Neil, can I bring you back into the conversation? What are your perspectives on these results?
I think it's really interesting, actually. I think it's actually, from my perspective, it's quite encouraging. I think personally, I think historically within our sector, I think we've always focused on our core capability. We've invested in projects for the long term. If you look back on maybe 15 years ago, you would select maybe a major flagship technology play and invest a great deal of time in that. I think what we're seeing now, and I think the VUCA world is a great way to put it. I totally agree with that statement earlier. Is that it's so volatile now and so changeable that really the best approach, provided that you do it in an ethical and compliant way, is to adopt a more flexible way of adopting technology. And we're seeing that, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear what the other panelists say, but I think we're seeing that a lot now with how major companies are using partners, smaller health startups to drive innovation rather than doing a lot of it internally. So it's actually, I completely agree. I think that's a real reflection of the shift that's happened in the last 10 years.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in Emmanuel and then Megan into the conversation. Emmanuel, can you see the results? Have you some perspectives you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question. I think across industry, within companies, I think it depends on what department you work in. Based on how receptive people are to the idea of technology. And sometimes the same challenges that we have with, let's say, getting certain people to, for example, I don't use Instagram just because I don't have many friends that are on Instagram, so there's no need for me to go on Instagram. But some people tend not to see the value of technology in healthcare, and I think that's what one of my missions, to get people on board to work in convincing people. But I think pharma in general, as of today, the approach has been to try, and so we do a lot of pilots, and so it's something I call pilotitis. Right, we do too many pilots and we don't never scale. So I think we need to make more bold steps around this and embrace it and help make this something that is global.
Thank you. And Megan.
I would agree that I think it depends what company you're at. I've been fortunate to work at a several smaller companies, and they have more of the startup feel where there is more of an option and an openness to try new things. To, you have an idea, work with your vendor, work with a partner to get it out there. And a lot of times it is successful, and sometimes it's just coming up with the idea and just pushing people to adapting it. But I've been fortunate to be in small companies that are very willing to try new things and implement them, not just on a pilot basis like Emmanuel's talking about, but across the board.
Thank you. And there's been a number of questions coming in from the audience, and I'm going to try and sort of paraphrase and collect them together, because there's been a number of questions about engaging with the end user, and whether they be called the consumer, the patient, the caregiver, the wider team. There are a number of questions that are coming through. So I think my question to the panelists is, how do we actually ensure adoption? We've talked about the fact that there is a wealth of new technology coming. We have talked about the fact that there is an education gap, both for our companies and for the users, and we've been very open about sharing what we know and what we don't, and also which generation we are going to be in when some of these technologies come forward. So what is it we can do as a pharma industry to actually ensure that adoption of new patient services are actually used, and take the bold steps that Emmanuel is talking about? I will start with Megan, and then go to Emmanuel, and then finish on load.
So I think the biggest thing is creating something and making it so relevant that they feel like they can't live without it, right? So if you go back to Nagori's presentation, Amazon, I don't know what I would do without Amazon, but make it the first thing that that patient thinks of within their treatment plan or within that product. Include relevant information and make sure that they are educated on it so they begin to use it.
Thank you. Emmanuel.
Can you repeat that question, please?
Right. So yes, I was paraphrasing a number of questions that are coming in from the audience about how do we make sure the patient is firstly involved, but it's not just about the patient, it's about the consumer, the wider care team, and how we then ensure that that there is adoption of these services. We've been talking about the fact that there's an education gap, that we have a try it and see kind of approach, but we do need to ensure that the investment we make in pharma has a value, and that the services are adopted. I wonder what your thoughts are about how we make sure that happens.
Correct. I think like anything else, we have to learn and improve product over time, right? So I think that we need to make these programs holistic. By holistic, I mean if we're trying to use technologies to engage patients and educate them, we should get this started from like phase 3 studies. By the time we do phase 3 study, before the drug actually comes to the market, right? And we continue engaging those patients even right before drug launches and after launch, right? So we have to invest in the patients to say, hey, this is our consumer, and we want to engage you and make sure you have the best service possible, right? So for example, look at Apple, for example. Most people have Apple Watches, Apple phones, the MacBook, because you belong in that ecosystem, right? And it's very interesting to see the discussions between Apple lovers and people that use Samsung or other devices, right? So I think we need to create that kind of atmosphere to own the relationship between the consumer. Today, I think as an industry, we are focused more towards the clinician being our customer, and we never actually focus on being engaged with the patient. Personally, I've tried several years ago to actually engage with the patient and run patient ad boards, and it's impossible to be the patient. I can meet in patient support groups, and it's impossible to be patients, right? So I think having that direct-to-consumer kind of approach will give us better insights as to what the consumer wants, and actually we could build products that could last a long time.
Bruce, for me, this is Nagori. I think
yes,
the key thing is patient experience, and I do agree with Megan. You know, nobody had to talk to me what Instagram was or how to work out Amazon, because actually it made my life so easier from the very beginning that actually I adopted it in, you know, and I learned myself to see how it worked. So I think the patient experience is the main thing we need to think about in terms of adoption.
Brilliant. And just this is a panel audience progression of a conversation. One of the questions that has just come in from the audience is, how do we ensure that patient adoption is linked to the feedback loop from the actual patient population that the services are supporting? Nogore, what are your immediate thoughts on that sort of that feedback loop that should come from?
Feedback loop, yeah, it's an interesting one, because one of the key things when we're delivering patient service, and Megan will know a lot about this as well, is getting the patient feedback on what is working, what is not working, and refining, reinventing, you know, evolving those programs. So and feedback can be collected in various different ways, and also, you know, we can use technology to get that feedback. So it's hugely important, and if not one of the main, well, if not the main thing in terms of measuring success, is one of the main things for us.
I would agree. I think it's important to look at both solicited and unsolicited.
So can I jump on this? This is Lode.
Megan first, and then Lode. I will come to you before I close, definitely. Megan, please continue.
Sure. So I think it's important to take the candid feedback that patients share in their interactions, whether it be, you know, on the phone or however they're communicating with your patient services support program. They often share what they like and don't like. So it's taking the time to consolidate that, to interpret that, and figure out what's working. And then I do agree that there are ways to send out surveys and just gather feedback a different way, even just doing a rating if it's an app. Things like that really, truly, those are the patients that really want to give you feedback and will give you the honest feedback.
Brilliant, thank you. And Lode, to you.
Yeah, I wanted to first echo what Megan said, and which also the others have agreed with. It's one thing that we see now much more clearly in the digital area with all consumer goods, is that the customer experience, and that's exactly what the first Megan said, the experience will drive not just adoption, that's acquisition of customers, but also loyalty, which is maintenance of customers. If we think about how we buy today flights and hotels and restaurants, it's not just on information, it's based on referrals, on scores, on TripAdvisor, Booking.com, and all of that. But what they don't tell, what they keep as a secret, TripAdvisor, Booking.com, and all those sites where you rate cameras and cars and whatever, is that all this can do is to get you to the product. Whether you will stay or not only depends on your personal experience. Because if we go to a highly rated restaurant and we have a bad experience, each of us will say, oh, clearly they're paying their customers for good reviews and you will never go back. Vice versa, if it's a good experience and the reviews are bad, we will say, well, some people are never happy. So that means that the personal experience plays at two levels. It's the group experience that drives me to go to the product. It's the personal experience that gets me there. And that's exactly what Emmanuel then said. We must do something which is very different for pharma. We've worked for years in a linear model where we basically have something, an idea, we go underground for 10 years and voila, there's the drug. Whereas in Silicon Valley, you release after 3 weeks something that looks pretty awful, and then you do weekly updates constantly. That's a totally different way for us, because it means we have to have different budget approval systems in our company. You can't just say the whole, usually we get budgets on the full description of the project or what it looks like. That doesn't work in digital. You have to learn as you go. And the third element I would like to add, which hasn't been mentioned, is this is all great, feedback and customer experience, but we still forget to mention the core, which is to start from a deep understanding of the needs. I still see a lot of what I call app-itis, where people think, well, the solution is an app, without ever thinking is that what patients need and want? And then they make the app, and then you can do all this experience measurement and whatsoever. But the best you can do is to improve something of which you never know what it was really the first best thing to do. So that, I think, are a few thoughts that I wanted to add, because I think it's a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you. And as always happens on a webinar, we are at time, and personally, I'm so sorry about that. I think this conversation could run for a lot longer. So I just wanted to very quickly say thank you ever so much to everybody that participated in this, the panelists and also the audience. There are more questions than we were ever going to be able to answer, but I know that they do get disseminated, and for those of you who have asked a question, we will try and find answers. Some of the things that I've been hearing very quickly are about multi-stakeholders, relevancy, engagement with the end user, fail fast, fail well, making bold steps, changing the business model, and the final words that Lode said, core needs to be starting with a deep understanding of the need. This conversation will continue. Nogore will be at the Barcelona meeting coming up, and also Manny will be joining Pharma in Philadelphia. We will make sure that this conversation continues, and we thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.